You wake slowly, not with a sudden jerk, but with the gradual unfurling of light against your eyelids. The weight of sleep remains heavy upon you, a deep sort of stillness that resists the insistent pull of the day. You do not need an alarm. The city itself provides the timing, drawing you up gently with the slow shift in the air's temperature. A persistent coolness clings to the edges of your simple room, circulating through the single opening and suggesting the closeness of the sea outside. You feel the rough weave of the rush mat beneath your legs as you sit up, unfolding yourself carefully. The floor is cool clay underfoot, a subtle chill that travels from your bare soles up into your ankles. You notice, almost without conscious effort, the familiar pattern of dust and dampness etched into the packed earth where you sleep. These details are constants in this life, the unchanging architecture of existence. Before you even think about rising fully, you take a deep breath, drawing the air deep into your lungs. It carries a complex melange of smells. There is the undeniable tang of salt and brine from the Mediterranean that drifts in through the open aperture. It mixes with the fainter, earthy scent of wet clay used in building, and underlying everything is the faint smell of soot, residue from last night's small fires burning in neighboring homes. The city around you remains wrapped in a profound hush. It is not merely quietness. It is a silence that feels layered, deep, and resonant, like the pause between two gentle waves breaking on the shore. You listen closely, trying to isolate any distinct sounds beneath the enveloping calm. There might be the muted cooing of pigeons finding rest on the roof tiles, or perhaps the very distant, almost soporific thrum of water moving against stone docks. You rise and your joints articulate with a minor creak, a sound that seems disproportionately loud in the pre-dawn quiet. You move toward the low lip of the door, peering out into the pale gray light. The world is still largely submerged in shadow, muted colors, blending together into soft grays and browns. The initial activity begins subtly at the waterfront. You observe figures moving with a practiced lethargy. The first few laborers who must be awake long before necessity dictates it. They move like ghosts emerging from the mist, carrying burdens that suggest an early start to physical labor. Their steps are weighted, measured against the cool stone pathways. Your routine takes over the observation. You know precisely how this part of the day unfolds. The rhythm of waking is as predictable and comforting as the tide itself. You navigate through your dwelling space, the arrangement of simple wooden furniture, the ceramic water jug placed by the door. Each object has its place, marked by years of quiet use. As you move toward a basin used for washing, you notice small details about the neighboring activity. A stall holder nearby is already beginning to sweep the grit and dust from his area, making a rhythmic shush-shush sound against the paving stones. The smell of wood smoke begins to strengthen as someone lights a cooking fire further down the street. The purpose of this early hour feels like an almost unspoken contract with the town itself. The acknowledgement that work must begin before the sun has gathered sufficient strength in the eastern sky. You spend a few moments simply collecting your thoughts, letting the chill air refresh your mind, making the transition from deep sleep to active alertness. The quietude emphasizes not only the stillness of things, but also the necessity of preparation. You finally move outside and walk slowly toward the edge of your block, drawn by the water's presence. You pause near a low wall that overlooks the harbor entrance. You watch the way the soft light is just beginning to interact with the restless surface of the Mediterranean. The water mirrors the coming sky, a palette of muted violets and pale peaches. The cold seeps into your socks, a sharp reminder of your physical place in the world. But you adjust yourself, accustomed now to this sensation. You recognize that life here, anchored by the sea and sustained by trade, demands constant readiness, even during these hushed moments before labor begins. The quiet is not an absence of life, but rather a steady accumulation of potential energy. You return indoors with a certain sense of purpose, knowing that the meticulous work ahead requires a mind fully awake, tuned to the rhythm of accounts and stars alike. You settle into your accustomed place, letting the lingering damp cool air help sharpen your focus, preparing yourself for the specific task that awaits. The cold, smooth reassurance of wet clay beneath waiting fingertips. The quiet moments are not empty. They are the necessary filling of the vessel before the day's demanding flow begins. The first light does not arrive in a sudden rush, but rather as a slow brightening of the eastern sky. You feel it first on your skin, a shift from the deep coolness of pre-dawn air to something merely cool, bearing the faint warmth of rising heat. The damp chill that seeped through the woven reed mat where you sleep is beginning to lift, giving way to the clean, sharp scent of the Mediterranean salt carried by the minimal breeze. You lift your head slowly, allowing your muscles to remember their state in semi-rest. Your dwelling remains quiet, insulated from the sounds and smells of the great port that lies just beyond the low walls. The morning has shifted, subtly. The initial crisp chill of the port air, which clung to your tunic and promised the day's coming heat, seems to have softened just a degree. You are still among the goods, standing near the docks where the great merchant ships berth and unload their precious cargoes. Around you, life is settling into its steady, predictable rhythm, a deep inhale and exhale that has marked the passage of hours in this thriving little harbor city. You find yourself at a low, sturdy wooden table, or perhaps it is simply a section of packed earth raised slightly above the tidal flow. Upon this surface are the tools, your stylus crafted from a straight piece of reed, resting beside the carefully stacked inventory tablets. The air here smells strongly of a mix that defines your life: saltwater brine, hot cedar, wood dust kicked up by heavy sandals, and the sharp, mineral scent of wet clay. You lift the stylus. It feels solid in your hand, warmed slightly from being held. You look at the pile of unused tablets. The surface of each one is a uniform, moist gray, absorbing the pale, filtered light filtering down between the sheds overhead. They wait patiently for the methodical pressure of your writing point. The work before you is simple, yet its necessity feels immense. It involves counting. Not merely counting numbers, but assigning verifiable quantity to vast amounts of physical material, bales, measures, lengths. You are balancing the sheer weight of existence in this port. Is there enough cedar arriving from the distant mountains? Will the incoming linen be sufficient to clothe the city through the dry months? These questions, large and humming with consequence, are contained within small wedge-shaped marks upon soft clay. You dip the tip of your stylus into a shallow pool of water meant for wetting the point. The water is cool, tasting faintly of limestone dust. You hesitate only momentarily before beginning the process, gently marking the first tally. A clean scrape against the moist surface. The sound is remarkably precise, a soft, wet whisper, almost like the distant murmur of the waves breaking against the seawall, but contained, controlled. The rhythm begins slow and meditative. Count a bundle of linen. You make your marks carefully in columns on the tablet. You are not simply writing. You are committing an agreement to permanence. You draw attention to the precise angles of the wedges, the way they accumulate into recognizable numerical symbols, a pattern that has maintained civilization here for generations. You shift slightly at the table, your knees pressing against a low wooden beam supporting the structure. The movement causes a slight rustle of woven reeds at your ankles. You take a moment to look out from your position. Beyond the stacks of goods and the rhythmic scratching of your own stylus, you can see the figures moving through the docks. They move with practiced ease. Some are hauling heavy sacks, their shoulders straining beneath loads that have been weighed and recorded hours before by others. Their motion is efficient, economical. You focus again on the table. The goods passing through your ledger today are a mix. Finely milled silver ingots from foreign lands, marked clearly with assay stamps, alongside rough bundles of local agricultural yield. Perhaps olives or dates waiting for transport to the temple storage areas. You begin the enumeration of the weights of foreign silver. This requires utmost care, because metal is portable wealth, easily lost or misrepresented. You trace a number on the clay, confirming its value against the physical weight placed near your elbow. The coolness of the moist tablet contrasts with the slight stickiness of accumulated soot and dust that seems to cling everywhere in this working quarter. It is part of the atmosphere, inseparable from the task itself. The quiet act of counting draws you into a state of deep immersion. Your peripheral awareness shrinks until all that exists is the reed, the clay, the stylus, and the single weight being logged. You are measuring stability. You are confirming existence through arithmetic. Sometimes, when you lift your head briefly, you notice the architectural details around you. The supporting beams for the sheds are rough-hewn cedar, darkened with age and exposure to sea air. Above, simple woven mats filter the sunlight into pale, dusty streaks on the ground. Everything here is built for utility, nothing for unnecessary ornamentation. As you transfer your attention from the silver weights to the bales of linen, the type of focus subtly changes. Silver suggests standardized, abstract value. Linen suggests labor and human effort, the countless hours of weaving contained in a single thick bundle. You count them differently. Each bale feels heavier with narrative than the last. Your marks become slightly more spaced out, reflecting this difference in perceived worth. The subtle humidity of the enclosed space begins to work on your senses. The scent of damp wool from the recently unrolled bales mixes with the sharp, sweet smell of cedar oil used nearby to keep woodworm at bay. It is a deeply material aroma, anchoring you firmly within the geography and commerce of Ugarit. Pausing between sections of accounting, you lightly brush dust from your sleeve across your tunic. You feel the subtle texture of the rough-spun wool beneath your fingertips. This small pause allows you to gather your thoughts, not in terms of what has been counted, but in understanding why it matters. These ledgers are more than just records. They are the infrastructure of trust. They are what prevent confusion from collapsing into genuine crisis. You settle back down over the tablet. The next sequence involves calculating lengths, a measure perhaps for fine maritime rope or lengths of exotic dye-colored textile destined for a royal court far away. This calculation requires visualizing abstract distance against tangible cloth. You adjust your posture, leaning slightly closer to steady your hand against the subtle vibrations caused by nearby carts moving goods. The sheer volume of these small tasks, counting, measuring, transcribing, can feel overwhelming if viewed as one large thing. But you realize that its power lies in its segmentation. One count after another. A measure here, a tally there. It is this endless series of meticulous acknowledgments that keeps the heart of Ugarit beating. The light begins to change slightly, shifting from the pale neutrality of morning to the warmer yellow-gray of late forenoon. You see children playing further down the docks, their shouts carrying faintly over the steady hum of human industry. Their simple games remind you of a life lived outside the necessary structure of ledger and tally, yet even they seem subject to the rhythm of the harbor. You complete a major section of accounts, perhaps finalizing the weekly yield of local grain intended for tax payment or temple stores. You press your thumb lightly against the smooth surface of the finished tablet, feeling the cool resistance of the hardened clay. The satisfaction is not dramatic. It is deep and quiet, like the slow settling of silt at the bottom of a calm estuary. Your physical exhaustion begins to assert itself in small waves. A slight stiffness in your neck, a faint dull ache in your lower back from hours spent seated over this low surface. You stretch slowly, noticing the pull across your shoulder blade and letting out a barely audible sigh. The motion pulls air into deep lung breaths that carry both the salt tang of the sea and the dusty scent of dry papyrus, which waits patiently nearby for other uses. The act of record-keeping thus becomes more than just clerical work. It is a continuous physical dialogue with the accumulated history and present needs of your community. You are the caretaker of memory, translating reality into structured symbols so that future generations can know how much was exchanged, what flourished, and where resources must flow next. You gather your stylus carefully, wiping a faint smudge of wet clay residue from its tip with your thumb. The stack of completed tablets feels satisfyingly weighty, representing tangible order wrested from the vast, messy reality of trade. You are prepared now to move these numbers and accounts into the central archive, where the continuous flow of goods meets the permanence of record. The air inside the temple storerooms shifts subtly as you pass through the heavy wooden door. It is cooler here than near the docks, smelling faintly of dry cedar and old resins, overlaid with a sweet, musty scent unique to preserved grain and incense wood. You walk past towering stacks of earthenware jars, each jar labeled by its contents: oil, spices, dried legumes, wine lees. These are not goods for immediate trade. They belong to the temple, meant either as sacrifice or as reserves that sustain life in times of need. You move toward your low writing table. The wood here is polished smooth by countless hands over centuries, cool and solid beneath your fingertips. On a separate slate tray rests a stack of prepared tablets, wet clay, soft and yielding to the gentle touch of your stylus. You dip the reed pen into a shallow bowl of water, watching the reeds darken slightly where they meet the damp surface. The rhythmic skick-skick sound of dipping is almost meditative in the profound silence of the hall. Your work today concerns devotion, not ledger profit. These tablets record sacred donations, the tribute from local families and surrounding settlements meant to sustain the gods and ensure the continued blessing of the city. You begin transcribing the account for the offerings made by a farmer from the outer fields. The clay is cool beneath your elbow as you lean over the table. With careful, deliberate motions, you draw the signs into the soft surface. Each symbol represents not just a count, but an act of faith, a gift surrendered to something greater than oneself. You focus first on the staples, measures of barley and chickpeas. The rhythm is slow. You make your marks, pausing after each group of symbols to observe them fully imprinted upon the clay. They record weights, measured in established units and amounts in sacks. You can feel the slight stiffness in your wrist muscles as you maintain this steady tempo, a focus that demands everything quiet and contained. After recording the grain, you turn your attention to things more varied: olive oil, rendered animal fat, and baskets of dates. These goods require different kinds of measurement. The signs for oil often reference vessels, while the dates call for counts based on maturity or harvest cluster. You contemplate the nature of these transactions. It is a transaction stripped bare of market fluctuation. It is simply life given back to the source that gives life. There is no negotiation here, only acceptance and fulfillment. At one point, your stylus catches on a particularly complex set of signs detailing oxen intended for ritual use. You pause, looking up at the vaulted roof structure above the storerooms. The high ceiling makes the diffuse light feel distant, filtered through layers of dust and time. You notice how the beams supporting the roof seem to echo the enduring nature of the temple itself, a physical counterpoint to the ephemeral rhythm of human life passing below it. The silence around you is not empty. It is full of dry potential, full of stored sustenance, full of countless prayers pressed into wet clay. You wipe your hands slowly on a scrap of woven linen before reaching for the next tablet. The texture of the linen feels rough and solid against your palms, grounding you in the physical reality of the moment. You think about what these donations signify for Ugarit. They are not just arithmetic entries. They are visible proof that the community remembers its spiritual anchors. Even when the D-Hows are busy counting silver on the docks, there is always this accounting of grace, detailed here among the sacks and jars. It provides a necessary counterweight to the wild fluctuations of global commerce. The weight of tradition settles upon your shoulders alongside the ache in your back. You have learned that simply recording things gives them permanence. The donation made today, written on wet clay, will survive the passing whims of merchants, the shifting tides, and even the slow erosion of time itself. It becomes a permanent tether between the living community and the abstract concept of the divine. Midday approaches, marking the peak of the temple's routine life. The air grows marginally warmer, carrying a faint scent of baking bread drifting from a kitchen adjoining the storeroom. You pause to stretch your fingers, rotating them slowly until the joints pop with small, satisfying clicks. Looking around at the stacks of potential wealth, the oil, the grain, you realize that this quiet system of accounting is what keeps the magnificent sprawl of Ugarit organized. It is the steady hand on the ledger that prevents the harbor from devolving into mere chaos. Your focus returns to a stack of receipts detailing linen donations from neighboring villages. The numbers are elegant in their repetition. Units, amounts, payers' names transcribed with exacting precision. You find a particular satisfaction in this repetitive task. It is not dramatic or thrilling. It simply requires discipline. Discipline applied to symbols allows order to reign over complexity. You lift your gaze from the tablet, letting your vision settle on the pattern of light filtering through the high window slats. The dust motes suspended in the shafts of sunlight dance and sparkle, small, inconsequential lives moving within a grand, enduring structure. You feel a deep resonance between that floating dust and the permanence you are creating with your cuneiform marks. Both exist for a moment, yet both become recorded. You smooth out the edge of the wet tablet, testing its structural integrity. It holds the weight of memory. As you continue recording these sacred transactions, the rhythm remains constant. Stylus descends, signs appear, breath is drawn in quiet concentration, and the process repeats. You are weaving a pattern of civilization with simple clay marks, ensuring that even the divine account has an end time, a neat column total, ready for the temple priest to consult when the moment calls for it. This act of logging devotion remains the quiet heart beating beneath Ugarit's bustling commercial life. You sit at the low desk, its surface smoothed by countless elbows and elbows before you. The air around you is a composite scent, a blend of wet salt from the nearby harbor, the dry, sweet smell of sun-baked dust mixed with the sharper, unmistakable tang of freshly cut cedar wood. It is late morning, and the steady business rhythms of Ugarit have settled into a predictable hum. You are surrounded by the evidence of exchange. Stacks of rough reed mats used as riding surfaces, jars of clean water for mixing clay, and several baskets holding reeds sharpened specifically for your stylus. Your focus rests on a specific pile of raw materials spread out before you, crates of dried fish from the southern coast, carefully rolled bales of linen cloth that feel cool even in this tropical heat, and thick lengths of cedar timber brought down from Cyprus. These disparate goods must now be made to converse on the page, represented by standardized signs and numbers. The task seems simple, yet it holds a profound complexity. You are not merely copying labels. You are translating physical reality into an intellectual framework. How many bales of linen equal how much cedar? What measure of silver balances half a length of fish netting? These ratios, these exchanges, form the entire structural integrity of this thriving coastal life. Each sign you cut must represent a consensus reached in a dusty meeting between a captain and a warehouse owner. You select a fresh tablet, its wet surface yielding softly under the tips of your fingers. The clay is pliable, holding the memory of water and earth. You dip the stylus tip lightly into the prepared mix, feeling the smooth resistance of the moist earth against the hardened reed. Before you begin, you trace the shape of a cedar log on the dusty floor with your toe, noting its enormous length, imagining the difficulty and time spent harvesting it. The physicality of trade dictates how you must think. When dealing with something solid, like this pillar of Cypriot cedar, the measurement is often linear, by length or volume. But when measuring textiles, the count might be in discrete units, bales or bolts. The fish, however, are measured either by weight or by netting pattern. Your brain quietly adjusts its geometric models to accommodate these differences. You find yourself thinking about the sheer number of different ways humans categorize value. You reach for a clean section of wet clay and begin forming the symbols for the cedar shipment first. The stylus scrapes a satisfying, slightly abrasive sound against the yielding surface. You meticulously record the quantity in units understood by all parties involved, ensuring that the accompanying signs also account for the wood's type. Is it heartwood or sapwood? Was it treated before shipment? These small details are not mere clutter. They are necessary qualifications that determine worth and legality. As you work through the cedar tally, your attention drifts to the linen. The bales are neatly stacked, smelling faintly of dried salt and sun-bleached flax. You imagine the women who harvested the fibers, the process of spinning them into thread, and then weaving them into these solid, heavy squares. Their labor is invisible in the final number you scribe, yet it underpins its value entirely. You calculate the equivalent portion of linen required to offset a shipment of ceramic storage jars, the clay being as vital to your trade record keeping as the objects themselves. You feel the cool smoothness of the wet clay beneath your knuckles, grounding you. The repetitive motion of inscription becomes a kind of meditation. You are not fighting numbers. You are arranging them into an ordered dialogue between goods and units. This rhythm, the pause before the sign, the decisive scraping sound, the slight moment of mental confirmation, is the core operating system of Ugarit. The challenge comes with the combination accounts. Here, you must balance the dissimilar elements, timber against cured fish fillets. One is rigid and durable, the other perishable and delicate. You need a common denominator for value. Your hand slows slightly as you conceptualize this equivalence. Perhaps the trade agreement assigns a fixed weight-to-length ratio for such exchanges. You calculate how many measures of silver are required to compensate for the inherent risk and rapid decay of the fish stock compared to the enduring presence of solid cedar. You press the stylus into the clay, forming symbols that represent this complex balance. The calculation feels like solving a practical puzzle rather than merely writing numbers. It requires recalling specific trade treaties and historical agreements stored in your mind, a living ledger of precedent. You are mapping not just goods onto paper, but relationships between communities. The air remains warm, settling around you. Sunlight filters into the room, catching the fine dust motes that dance over the piles of reeds and baskets. You pause from the fish record to observe a nearby group of dock workers moving heavy sacks. Their physical effort is loud and abrupt compared to your careful work, yet both activities are governed by the same underlying geometry: supply meeting demand. They move goods. You catalog the movement of value. Reflecting on this exchange, you think about what makes this system possible: the quiet agreement that if a scribe like you accurately records these exchanges, then they can happen at all. The trust inherent in arithmetic is far more fragile than the stone seawall or the massive ships docked nearby. It relies entirely on your steady hand and your careful mind. You move to a different type of transaction record: the accounts for a distant expedition. They traded with people who used wholly different measurement systems, whose gods dictated their economic needs. You must interpret the surviving records: fragmented tablets detailing goods given in weights of copper, lengths of woven reed mats, and measures of exotic spices. This forces you to become an expert in comparative metrics. How do you reconcile a local measure of a bushel used 200 years ago with the modern standardized weight? The process involves immense intellectual patience, tracing concepts rather than just figures. The cedar record is completed first, its signs precise and deep. Next, the linen receives its appropriate balance against the calculated worth of various goods. Finally, you dedicate a small section to summarizing the overall exchange summary for the day, a condensed accounting that speaks volumes with minimal symbols. You ensure every weight cited has an origin noted, and every unit conversion is explicitly stated. The scratching sound eventually softens into a steady rhythm of focus. Your breath deepens slightly as you settle back into the quiet work, observing how the physical act of writing becomes intrinsically linked to your understanding of the world. These meticulous signs are what make this bustling port functional, an invisible spine supporting the outward appearance of commerce. You smooth your calloused thumb over the surface of the tablet after the final sign is made. The wet clay begins its gentle process of drying and hardening, transforming your fleeting thought into a semi-permanent record. You know that once these records are gathered and stacked, they become historical fact, a quantifiable account of life in Ugarit, confirming who owned what, where it came from, and precisely how much it was exchanged for. The sheer weight of accumulated knowledge feels cool against your skin as you rest your hand on the finished work, readying yourself for the next puzzle of exchange to arrive. The scratching sound of your stylus ceases, leaving a momentary void filled only by the low hum of the midday heat. You finally rise from the low stool where you spent the morning's hours tracing lines across wet clay. Your hands feel faintly stained with dry river mud and the fine grit of the writing implements. The work of the ledger, though completed for now, seems to hold a residue, a quiet weight of countless numbers that cling to your thoughts. You slowly rise, stretching muscles accustomed to remaining hunched over the plane of the table, feeling the stiffness creep up your back. It is not a dramatic stretch, merely a necessary returning to an upright posture, grounded once more in the solid earth of Ugarit. You walk quietly away from the writing area toward a low bench near the port's periphery. The great work chambers are temporarily empty now. The intense concentration required for arithmetic and accounting has peaked and receded with the sun's climb. What remains is the slow, languid rhythm that defines the pause between essential tasks, a quiet breathing of the community. You settle onto the hard wood bench, allowing your breath to match the gentle rise and fall of the air around you. The midday light here is different from the cool dawn or the sharp angle of late afternoon. It is diffused, heavy, filtering down through the dust motes that dance in the warm shafts between the awning poles. You close your eyes briefly, letting the silence settle into your bones, a deeper quiet than the anticipatory hush of the morning. A small smell begins to register in your nostrils, a mixture that is overwhelmingly local and profound. It is the sour tang of dried fish mixed with the sweetness of ripe fruit left too long in the sun, underscored by the dusty scent of humanity resting from labor. You realize you are hungry, a simple biological signal interrupting the intellectual focus of the morning. This necessity redirects your attention to the immediate needs of sustenance. You walk slowly toward a small corner where a few mats and baskets await. Here, a day's meal has been arranged by a friend, or perhaps simply purchased from a local vendor who understood your need for quiet refueling. On a clean piece of woven matting is placed thick, warm bread, the crust slightly hardening in the sun, but still yielding softness within. Beside it rests a shallow wooden bowl containing pale green olives and another filled with small, creamy chunks of cheese. You take up the bread first. The weight of it feels substantial in your hands, solid enough to measure against any unit of silver, yet utterly nourishing for the body. You tear off a piece and begin to chew slowly. The initial taste is one of simple grain and yeast, grounding you firmly in this moment, separating the mental world of numbers from the physical reality of hunger. Next, your fingers dip into the olives. They are cold to the touch, slightly slick with their own juices. You pluck one, bringing it slowly to your mouth, savoring the sharp, salty pop that momentarily brightens your senses. The small act requires a different kind of patience than transcribing cuneiform signs. There is no rush, only contemplation of taste. As you eat and chew, your peripheral vision begins to collect details, the subtle, slow ballet of life continuing around this temporary sanctuary. You do not focus on them sharply, but allow them to drift into your awareness like smoke through the passageways. These observations are less about storytelling and more about gathering a natural rhythm, a sense of belonging that transcends ledgers and units of measure. Near the edge of the harbor wall, where the great cedar crates are stacked moments before, you see two men carefully mending large fishing nets. The threads, colored with local dye, are intricate things to work on. You watch their repetitive motion. A pull, a knot drawn tight, a testing tug. It is labor that demands deep patience and focused hands, a manual rhythm mirroring the mental discipline required to balance accounts. Further away, near a shaded recess of pale stone that serves as seating for local children, a group of boys plays. They are not engaged in structured fun. They simply exist in physical proximity to one another. A small piece of discarded pottery rolls past your feet and is immediately chased by two youngsters who giggle, a sound that lacks the dramatic flourish of professional amusement, merely existing in the shared space of the port. You watch a single mother, wrapped in a rough linen shawl, carefully guiding a donkey laden with fresh baskets of figs. The donkey moves slowly, its hooves scraping a fine, gritty dust from the stone pathway. Her head is slightly bowed, preoccupied with the weight and the careful navigation around obstacles. Every movement observed, the slow sway of the mother's hips, the steady gait of the animal, is governed by the physical constraints of their daily routine. These sights become part of your mental arithmetic. They are natural units of exchange, not tallied in silver, but measured in effort and enduring repetition. The way the nets require constant mending speaks to the unavoidable nature of decay. Things break, commerce falters, lives tire, and thus repair is always necessary. You sit with this quiet thought. The midday meal naturally encourages reflection on structure versus flux. Your life as a scribe demands structure, predictable columns, defined weights, fixed symbols. But the world surrounding you, the wandering line of children, the patient toil of mending nets, the natural yield of ripe figs, is in constant, soft motion. You carefully wipe your hands on a corner of the matting. The crumbs and residue are proof of this simple sustenance, but also reminders that even the act of eating must be accounted for. The momentary pause must restore the energy needed for future work. Your mind begins to untangle itself from the specific complexities of cedar-4-linen ratios and moves toward a more generalized understanding of human persistence. The steady, unremarkable life cycle observed around you, the feeding, the working, the resting, is the greatest ledger of all. It is recorded not on brittle clay, but etched into the routine patterns of breath and passing time. You contemplate how much of what you record in your ledgers, the value of a single cedar beam, the weight of an olive's pressing worth, is merely a temporary valuation assigned by men to objects that are simply present. This quiet observation grounds your understanding of exchange itself. It is not just about transferring property. It is also about acknowledging shared rhythm, the collective metabolism of a busy port city, pausing briefly for nourishment and rest before recommitting to its relentless flow. The slow act of eating, observing life's gentle, predictable failures and recoveries, serves as a silent lesson in patience and reliable existence. You feel a subtle lessening of the mental tension that had gathered during the morning's intensive accounting, replaced by a quiet readiness, a feeling as durable and dependable as the stone bench upon which you now rest your hands. The afternoon sun, having warmed the dust and bleached the stone of the port district, begins its slow descent toward the western water. You gather your stylus and the stacked, unfired clay tablets. They feel cool and smooth under your fingers, a perfect contrast to the fine grit dusted on your simple wrap skirt tunic. This time's work is different from the inventories of cedar or the accounts of oil. It requires looking up, away from the ordered lines of ledger writing, toward something vast and indifferent, the sky. You settle at a low, shaded table near the edge of the main administrative building, close enough to hear the muffled rhythm of daily life continuing around you, yet far enough that your quiet work is undisturbed. The air here carries a particular quality in the late day, a mixing of warm dust from the baking ground, the faint salt tang carried on a gentle sea breeze, and the lingering scent of charcoal smoke from a passing boat's fire pit. You select an older tablet. It bears signs of use, its surface slightly uneven, hinting at years of careful hands before yours. This is not merely bookkeeping. It is a mapping of time itself. You begin by transferring or recording celestial knowledge onto the clean slate. The signs you scratch out are unfamiliar to the merchant class who only know weights and measures. These symbols represent paths traced above the heads of men, fixed points that guide ships through vast darknesses far from Ugarit's sheltered harbor. You think of the deep-sea sailors, the people whose lives are measured by the rising and setting stars rather than by the tally in a warehouse book. For them, this knowledge is life itself. The stylus scratches lightly against the clay, a soft, rhythmic whisper that seems to absorb into the general hush of the late afternoon. You work through the known constellations, meticulously outlining the paths of several significant markers used for deep-sea navigation across the Mediterranean expanse. Each cluster of stars, each visible path, must be recorded with the precision of an architect drafting temple foundations. If these records are faulty, a ship might sail into hidden shoals or simply never find its charted course home. You pause after recording one particularly complex sequence, the alignment of several markers in the summer sky. You lift your head slightly and feel the warmth of the sun on the back of your neck. You notice how the distant mountains, hazy blue against the growing softness of the western sky, seem to merge with the horizon line itself. It is a merging of earthly boundaries and infinite space that your hand is attempting to contain within hardened clay. The difference in scale feels dizzying, yet necessary to document. This work demands a careful linking of seemingly disparate forms of knowledge. On one side of your mind are the simple calculations: 5 units of linen versus 3 measures of silver. These are concrete exchanges, visible and immediate. But here, you are dealing with patterns that unfold over months, even years, the subtle drift of stellar paths against the steady turning of the earth. It is a more abstract kind of ledger keeping, governed not by fluctuating market prices, but by the unwavering geometry of the heavens. You smooth out a section of your folded notes, running your finger lightly over a freshly formed cuneiform sign representing rising at zenith. The clay is surprisingly receptive, cool and yielding. You contemplate how this knowledge, gathered across generations through patient observation, is being formalized into records that must endure the passage of centuries. These tablets are not just history. They are navigational instructions written in symbols. The smell of wet clay mixes subtly with the fainter scent of sea spray carried from a boat docking nearby. You watch a fisherman haul in his net. The motion is practiced, economical, each tug and lift having happened countless times before. It's a rhythm as dependable as the tides, but far more visceral than the mathematical certainty of stars. You realize that all human routine, the careful counting of inventory, the devotion paid at the temple, the planning of a voyage, is ultimately structured by cyclical time. The rising and setting sun, the flood and ebb of the tide, the predictable dance of celestial bodies. The purpose of these records becomes clearer to you. They do not just help sailors, they connect Ugarit to the rest of the known world. By documenting the heavens, you are ensuring that the commerce recorded in Chapter 3 and 5 can continue to flow, that the cedar from Lebanon will still reach the great harbors, and the fine linen from Cyprus will still find its buyer. The stars act as the invisible road map for prosperity. You dip your stylus carefully into the thin slurry of water used to keep the clay workable. You focus on the small task at hand, to record a specific degree of declination for a particular month. And in that deep concentration, the bustling life around you seems to recede, becoming part of the background hum, the quiet soundtrack to continuity. Your own breath becomes slow and steady, mirroring the measured pace of your work. You are an archivist of time, recording not just where things are, but when they can be found. The subtle shift in light is noticeable now. The sharp edges of the day have softened into a golden wash over the rooftops. You finish the last sign, leaving the stylus resting on the damp clay. It feels satisfyingly complete, a segment of cosmic truth successfully captured. As you wipe your hands and prepare to stack the tablet carefully, you feel a deep calm settle over you, the quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding one's place in such an immense and enduring process. You are merely the keeper of the symbols, linking the earthly trade of today with the endless journeys, guided by the unchanging light of tomorrow's sky. The early afternoon heat has begun to settle over the port. The light, which was bright and harsh at dawn, now takes on a softer, more diffused quality as it filters through the stacked awnings and along the curving harbor wall. You are seated where you usually work, a low wooden bench surrounded by your familiar arrangement of writing materials. Small mounds of wet clay, handfuls of reed styluses, and stacks of completed tablets awaiting drying. The air here carries a complex blend of scents. There is the sharp, mineral tang of salt spray carried inland by the gentle sea breeze, mingling with the deeper, earthy smell of damp mud bricks used in construction, and underneath it all, the persistent, faint scent of rendered animal fat from nearby cooking fires. You look down at the stack of tablets before you. They are not your usual ledgers detailing cedar measures or linen bales. These particular pieces feel slightly rougher, the clay itself seeming to have been prepared for a different kind of record. They hold an unexpected weight in their silent presence, suggesting that what is about to be written here touches upon something beyond merely counting physical units. A delegation has arrived from lands far inland, lands whose commerce with Ugarit is vital but complex. Their representatives do not speak the local tongue, nor are they accustomed to the standardized accounting measures used at the docks or in the temple storerooms. They carry goods and ideas that must be recorded here for the sake of future transactions. But those goods and ideas require a linguistic bridge first. You pick up one of the specialized tablets, its surface cool under your fingertips. The work ahead is not one of arithmetic. It is a translation. It is about signs, symbols, and how concepts themselves travel across borders and languages. You smooth a finger over the damp clay, contemplating the task of rendering an abstract idea into universally understood script. The delegation speaks haltingly, using a language that draws on several regional influences, a blend of sounds and grammatical structures that have existed for many years, but never coalesced into one single, clean form. Their request is documentation. They need their customs, their goods, and their intended payment structure recorded in a standardized way that all future Ugaritic merchants will recognize and trust. You observe the representatives. They are men of solid purpose, dressed in robes that hint at both wealth and great distance. They do not look at you with awe or even resentment. They regard your skills simply as a necessary professional utility. Their presence reinforces the fundamental truth of your station. That knowledge, the ability to write down and understand complex systems, is one of the most valuable forms of trade itself. The rhythmic clicking of their foreign shoes on the packed earth is a steady, irregular beat against the more predictable sounds of Ugarit's daily life. The soft clanging of weights, the muted shouts from market stalls in the distance. You settle back onto your low stool. The familiar itch of concentration begins, bringing with it a focused calm. The first step is not to write numbers, but to identify core concepts. What do they mean by measure? Does their measurement of time correlate to solar days or lunar cycles? When they mention commodity, are they referring to raw materials like unspun wool or finished, ready-to-use textiles? You listen closely to the pitches and inflections in their speech, separating the sounds that carry concrete meaning from those that are simply filler phonetic scaffolding. It is a process akin to peeling back several layers of sediment to reach solid rock. The clay tablet before you becomes a mental scaffold. You begin by finding the common ground, the universal principle beneath the linguistic noise. For instance, when they speak of exchange, regardless of their specific phrasing, the concept translates into giving something tangible, a gift in return for receiving something equally valuable. This core logic of reciprocity forms the backbone of the required signs. The physical act of writing slows your internal dialogue until only pure focus remains. You dip the reed stylus into a small pool of water. The motion is precise, gathering the moisture, positioning the tip against the waiting clay surface. The sh sound of the wet stylus scratching through the damp earth is intensely satisfying, a quiet marker that an abstract thought has been successfully anchored to a permanent form. You work slowly on developing specific glyphs, representing units and quantities according to their system, then comparing those symbols against known Ugaritic standards. It is a quiet, scholarly debate conducted entirely between you and the clay. You must standardize their foreign sign into something manageable for your own ledgers. A single standardized representation of half-cart load, or 3 days sailing time. At times, you pause simply to breathe the air. You feel the subtle vibration through the wooden stool as a passing donkey cart rattles by down the main thoroughfare, laden perhaps with freshly harvested dates from the fields beyond the city walls. The memory of that strong, sweet scent of ripened fruit momentarily overlays the pervasive saltiness of the port. This contrast, the fresh sweetness against the maritime grit, grounds you in the immediacy of life. This work is more intellectually demanding than balancing an inventory sheet for cedar logs. When you balance trade ledgers, you are dealing with a known system. If 2 bales weigh 20 units each, the calculation remains constant regardless of who stacked them or where they came from. Here, however, you must map one entire foreign logic onto your own established framework. You are not just a clerk. You are an interpretive cartographer of human intent. You notice how certain groups, the people whose culture is built entirely around complex trade relationships, are willing to invest effort in mutual understanding. They understand that their goods, no matter how valuable or exotic, only retain worth within a shared system of communication. This realization brings a quiet weight to your hands. The careful placement of each stylus stroke becomes an act of intellectual mediation. The afternoon light shifts again, softening into a gentle gold that catches the particles of dust suspended in the warm air. As you work through the final section, the signs detailing cultural exchanges, such as documenting the proper handling of sacred artifacts or honoring local maritime traditions, you feel the deep satisfaction of having brought disparate concepts into a single ordered narrative. The script moves from pure commerce to social architecture. You lean back slightly, rubbing your forearm where it rests on the cool surface of the workbench. The scent of wet clay now seems blended with the warmth emanating from your own concentration. You have managed to create a legible pathway for communication across deep cultural chasms. The tablets, once blank and waiting, now stand as silent witnesses to an act of profound intellectual linkage. Your gaze drifts out towards the water. The ships are still bobbing gently in the harbor basin, their masts tracing elegant, restful vertical lines against the vast blue expanse. They have traversed distances measured not just by leagues, but by linguistic and commercial understanding. And it is through your quiet skill that these connections continue to breathe, ensuring that the small, persistent heart of Ugarit keeps beating with the steady rhythm of recorded exchange. You carefully gather the completed tablets into a stack, knowing they are ready for shipment, not of goods, but of knowledge. The sun has moved towards the western slope of the bay, casting long, cool shadows across the cobbled square. You sit at your low work table near the open storage area, surrounded by piles of recently used tablets and neatly stacked clay slates. The day's energy, a vibrant mix of voices, smells, and clatterings, seems to be drawing back, settling into the deeper rhythms of the city. There is a palpable quietness that accumulates as evening approaches, a hush before the final count of the day's efforts. You run a finger lightly across the surface of the last tally sheet you completed, a ledger detailing amphorae of oil from distant lands, balancing shipments of fine linen against newly harvested grain measures. The satisfying weight of these settled accounts is almost tangible. Looking back at your workspace, the evidence of the day's labor is everywhere. wet clay mixed with ochre dust, scattered reeds, and columns of cuneiform signs that stand as silent witnesses to countless exchanges. This systematic accounting is not just about profit or loss. It is the architectural blueprint for the life of Ugarit itself. Every single sign you inscribed today helped maintain a fragile equilibrium between local needs and distant desires. You lean back slightly, stretching your shoulders, feeling the lingering ache in your wrists from hours spent manipulating the stylus across the soft surface of the clay. The air now carries a cooler scent than it did at midday. It is a mix of damp sea salt carried by the slight evening breeze and the sharp, earthy smell of drying wet clay that permeates the entire quarter. You start with the final reconciliation process. This requires a different kind of focus from counting. It demands an eye for absence. You begin to review the master sheets, the foundational records that should encompass every item moved today. You check the cedar ledger against the shipping manifest. You verify the amount of silver recorded as payment matches the physical goods counted at the docks this morning, and so on. Your movements are slow, almost meditative. You trace a finger over a particularly large number in the linen accounts, noting the symbol for bale repeatedly repeated, confirming that the count tally provided by the overseer aligns perfectly with the amount of grain donated to the temple registers earlier today. The physical act of matching these numbers requires you to slow down your mind until it operates with extreme precision. You are not merely checking columns. You are weaving a tapestry of trust across time and distance, ensuring that every single recorded movement has an accountable source or destination. When you find a discrepancy, a slight mismatch between the estimated harvest yield and the actual amount stored in the temple cellar inventory, you do not feel frustration, but rather a quiet intellectual puzzle. You pause, tilting your head slightly, letting the weight of this small imbalance settle into your awareness. This momentary stillness is critical. It forces you to recall earlier parts of the day. Did the measure itself change? Was the initial count compromised by the hurry of morning trade? Sometimes, reconciling ledgers means realizing that the truth was not in the numbers themselves, but in the timing of the record. You then reach for a fresh tablet, wetting it carefully with your palm-cupped fingers. The sound this time is less pronounced than when you started. It is merely a gentle shush of water against moist earth. You begin to write notes on the anomalies, not as complaints, but as observations, a careful accounting of uncertainty itself. This act turns potential error into recorded knowledge. Sometimes, what seems like an omission is simply an undocumented event, and your meticulous scrutiny acts as a subtle form of historical retrieval, pulling the quiet detail back into the light before it evaporates entirely. As you work through these adjustments, observing the slow sweep of the last vestiges of sunlight, you become acutely aware of how interconnected this process is to daily survival. The ledger books, marked by reed and wet clay, are far more than just records. They are the current definition of ownership and obligation in Ugarit. You recall earlier, when balancing complex exchanges involving disparate units, timber lengths versus weights of fish. That same rigorous attention is needed now, treating the small discrepancies with the same gravity as the great shipments. The systematic nature of it soothes your mind, replacing the chaotic energy of commerce with predictable order. Slowly, you move away from the most urgent accounts and toward the larger, overarching ledgers, the cumulative records that track the flow of basic necessities over months or even seasons. You methodically cross-reference these grand totals with almanacs and regional yields recorded in separate sections of your storage area. The intellectual weight of this comprehensive review settles over you gently, not as a burden, but as deep satisfaction. It is the feeling of having closed a complex circuit. Everything accounted for, everything documented. You notice the changing light reflecting off the wet surfaces around you, the small pools of discarded water catching the last golden streaks before giving way to the deeper hues of twilight blue. These colors mirror the transition in your work, from the bright clarity of active trade to the deep, reflective calm that only comes with completion. With a final sweep of the stylus over the most important section, the master total tally for the day's economy, you feel a profound sense of quiet accomplishment. You are sealing not just numbers, but relationships, affirming that these exchanges were equitable and memorable for future reference. The process slows to almost nothingness now, save for the rhythmic, faint scratching sound as you make your concluding notations. It is an echo of diligence, promising stability into tomorrow's cycles. You stack the completed tablets carefully in a designated basket, noting them by their category. Trade goods here, temple donations there, celestial measurements stacked separately. The physical act of archiving feels like an act of protective care. You are curating memory for your community. When every slate is filed away and all columns have been checked for internal consistency, the intense focus finally begins to soften around the edges of your awareness. You look up from your work table, taking a deep breath that pulls in the mingled aromas, dust, dry reed, wet salt, and the residual metallic scent of the clay itself. The immediate duty is finished. Now comes the quieter process of preparing for tomorrow's beginning cycle. You gather up the few remaining tools, carefully wiping down the slate surfaces until they are cool to the touch. Every movement must be economical now, reflective of the quiet dignity that defines the end of a working day in this important coastal town. The careful act of putting away your instruments signals not just rest, but successful preparation for continued life. You have guided Ugarit through another cycle of trade, and its stability rests, gently, within these neat piles of wet clay. We will return to this routine when the light is soft again before dawn. The last rays of the sun have slanted away from the port, drawing long shadows across the dusty plaza. The frantic energy that defined your day begins to recede, replaced by a soft, gathering dusk. You sit at your writing slab, the surface now dusted with fine particulate matter, a mix of dried silt and residual charcoal from extinguished lamps nearby. Your work, the careful reconciliation of every ledger entry, the accounting for goods measured in cedar lengths and vessels weighed against astronomical time, is drawing to a close. The great tally of Ugarit settles into quiet completion around you. You reach out, your fingers brushing against the cool smoothness of damp clay. It feels utterly familiar, this porous earth that has served as both record and canvas for generations. You begin the process of clearing your workspace. You dampen a portion of the large tray with water from a nearby ewer, letting the wet linen absorb the moisture. The sound is gentle, a rhythmic shhp against the hard stone table. This careful wetting is not just cleaning. It is ritually signaling the conclusion of the working cycle. The small residue on your tools, the stylus points and the prepared clay tablets, is collected carefully. You dip the hardened edges of your implements into the slurry, rinsing away any stray traces of soot or fat mixed with the damp earth. Notice how the water runs over them, carrying away not only the physical dirt, but also the ephemeral dust of a long day's labor. Each drop seems to carry an echo of numbers written and agreements signed. Your attention settles on the stack of finished tablets awaiting filing. They are dry now, stacked neatly by category. Trade accounts from the docks, temple donations detailing grain yields, and the precise celestial measurements recorded for the returning ships. You handle them with a practiced care. They are not merely pieces of baked clay. They are the collective memory of your community, a quantifiable record of existence that validates every shipment, every prayer, every journey taken under the Mediterranean sky. The task of packing is methodical. You gently scoop up any remaining scraps of dry tablet fragments and place them into a small pouch made of rough woven flax. Then, you begin arranging your writing tools and the finalized ledgers into your heavy leather satchel. The scent rising from this process is complex. The faint mineral sharpness of wet clay mixing with the heavier, more comforting smell of soot, the byproduct of lamps used by late-day scholars and dock workers alike. It is an aroma that smells profoundly of continuity. You lift the pouch and the satchel. They feel weighted in your hands, not just with the physical weight of their contents, but perhaps with the conceptual gravity of all the knowledge they hold. You pause for a moment before moving away from the table, allowing yourself to notice the contrast between the work area and the passing twilight. The harsh, sun-baked colors of the docks are mellowing into deeper tones, indigo, charcoal gray, and shades of bruised purple in the sky. A small philosophical thought arrives with this quiet moment, the nature of keeping accounts. You spent your day balancing bales against measures. You reconciled the physical reality of a cedar log with its abstract recorded value. But what is truly being accounted for? Is it merely wood, or is it the network of trust that allowed the boat carrying it to safely reach Ugarit? Are these numbers just counting grain, or are they recording the devotion and stability necessary for the temple itself to thrive? The scent of wet clay against the cooling evening air feels grounding. It forces a deceleration. You notice how your shoulders, which held the slight tension of concentration all day, the careful lean over the slab, the steady grip on the stylus, begin to soften now that the intellectual demand has eased. Your breathing deepens into an unhurried rhythm, syncing gently with the diminishing sounds of the port. You move away from your dedicated writing space. The path is damp with evaporated spray and residue moisture. You walk slowly through the nearby alleyways, separating the merchant stalls from the residential structures. These streets, though functional, possess a unique intimacy at this hour. Torches flicker in high windows, casting warm, erratic pools of light that struggle against the encroaching dark. You pass by empty wooden carts resting against walls, their wheels coated in dust and sea salt. They seem to sleep, waiting for the morning's lifting effort. The smells shift again as you walk, away from the mineral tang of wet earth, towards cooking smoke. The sweet, yeasty scent of baking bread mixed with char smoke that speaks of simple evening meals. You notice a cluster of small vessels near a low wall. Some contain water for washing, others hold burning oil for illumination. Each object, placed carefully by its owner, tells a story of routine and domestic persistence. As you settle into your own dwelling, the atmosphere changes once more. The bustling noise is gone entirely. Only muffled sounds penetrate the thick plaster walls. Perhaps the distant, rhythmic call to prayer from a nearby quarter, or simply the steady, hypnotic sound of water lapping against the stone docks far out in the harbor. You do not need to physically close anything. The simple act of carrying your work home and settling down is its own form of closure. You sit briefly near an open window, looking out towards the darkening expanse of the sea, the same body of water that feeds every ledger entry you created today, linking Ugarit to distant lands and unknown peoples. The scribble life, you realize, requires not just acute intelligence, but a deep appreciation for these rhythms. The rise and fall of the tide mirrors the rise and fall of the market. The predictable path of the moon informs the recording of trade goods. To successfully keep records is to participate intimately in the vast, ongoing pattern of life itself. The weight of your satchel now feels lighter, transformed from a burden of accounts into a repository of quiet understanding. You gather yourself, allowing the day's sharp focus on numbers and script to gently dissipate, leaving behind only the profound calm that follows intellectual rigor. The deep satisfaction of a cycle completed, recorded, and safely filed away until the dawn calls you back to the cedar wood and the soft clay once more. You find yourself settled now, the dust of the day and the scent of cooled soot mingling with the increasingly fresh brine air. The weight of your riding satchel feels less heavy than it did hours ago, though it still holds the cool bulk of completed tablets, the ledger of trade, the accounting of sacred grain, the careful measurements of passing stars. The waterfront where you stand or sit now is beginning to settle into the deeper hush of night. It is a different quiet than the silence of dawn. This is a weighted silence, filled with the low murmur of distant voices and the slow, steady breath of the Mediterranean Sea against the stone quays. You are near enough to feel the coldness emanating from the water, an ancient coolness that seems to absorb all unnecessary sound. You turn your gaze upward. The deep purple-black canopy above is suddenly vast, an overwhelming spread dusted with points of brilliant, enduring light. These stars, the very constellations you spent late afternoon meticulously recording onto wet clay, hang suspended in a timeless indifference. They are fixed lamps in the throat of the night. You remember the meticulous process of recording them. The challenge was not just seeing the patterns, but understanding their constancy. How these blazing points had marked the passage of time for your own hands, linking the momentary rush of commerce, the unloading of cedar or the tallying of silver, to an eternal cosmic clock. Lying back against a low wall, you take a deep breath. The air is cooler now than it was at midday, carrying the faint, mingled smells of drying fish and distant cooking fires. You observe the rhythm of life passing nearby. Sometimes a solitary donkey makes its slow way along the quay. Other times, a small group of families passes by, their movements practiced and soft under the emerging moonlight. Your initial focus remains on those stars. They seem to pull at your thoughts, suggesting that while the goods brought into Ugarit, the linen, the wood, the spices, are always changing, eventually being consumed or traded away, the cycle marked by these lights remains absolute. This is a profound thought, one often absorbed in quiet reflection. You recall the arithmetic puzzles of the day, balancing 10 lengths of rope against 3 measures of oil, equating the weight of silver to the volume of grain. Each number on those tablets was a temporary structure, built for an immediate purpose, to allow someone else to trust the trade until dawn. But these stars, they demand no accounting. They simply are. The coldness at your skin is comforting now, pulling you into the moment. You notice the subtle contrast between the artificial glow of oil lamps in nearby homes and the immense, natural brilliance above. The lamps speak of human effort, of small pockets of warmth against the vast, cool indifference of night. But the stars speak of permanence. It brings a quiet sense of humility to your work. When you record stellar paths, you are not simply writing instructions for sailors. You are participating in a continuity. You are connecting the present moment, the weight of your stylus, the scratch on fresh clay, to every generation of seafarers who watched these same lights before you. You consider the life of Ugarit itself, a port city built upon such transient human effort. Everything here is fluid. The ships arrive and depart. The goods are bought and sold. The fortunes rise and fall with the changing tides of global trade. Yet, nestled above this bustling hub of exchange, the sky remains constant. The task of the scribe, you reflect, is therefore twofold. You must be intimately aware of the temporary, the fluctuating price of cedar, the quality of the local barley harvest, and yet you must operate with a deep respect for what endures. Your ledgers are records not just of commodities, but of community memory itself. As your contemplation settles, the sounds around you begin to harmonize into a slow, gentle rhythm. The slight creak of timbers from moored vessels mixes with the repetitive lapping sound of small waves against rocks. You feel the deep pull toward rest, a calm that arrives after the focused effort of intellectual work, a stillness earned by meticulous documentation. You gently gather your loose tablets and reeds, securing them within your leather satchel. The coolness seeps into the material of the bag, grounding you. With the careful movements of someone accustomed to handling delicate, irreplaceable artifacts, you prepare to leave this edge of the harbor. You walk slowly along the packed earth path, your steps mirroring the measured pace of the night itself. The light from a neighboring oil lamp catches briefly on the dust motes suspended in the cool air, revealing the intricate geography of your small world. The narrow alleys, the clustered dwellings, the continuous presence of human life built against the edge of the sea. You pass by homes where simple food waste is burning, casting smells of sweet smoke and roasting spices into the night. These scents are part of the continuity you observe, the day's hard work giving way to the deep simplicity of rest. The numbers etched onto your tablets, the totals of copper, the count of bales, seem less urgent now. They have been delivered, archived, and entrusted. Their temporary importance has faded into a quiet understanding. You know that tomorrow the cycle will begin again, the pre-dawn chill, the smell of wet clay, the sharp focus on arithmetic beginnings. But for this moment, suspended between the workday and deep sleep, you carry the vastness of the night sky within your thoughts. The stars are a profound quietude, an unchanging measure against the flow of human effort. You continue walking toward the relative quiet of your own dwelling, letting the rhythm of your breathing match the low, hypnotic sigh of the distant tides. You let the memory of the celestial map settle over you, bringing not exhaustion, but a sense of settled purpose. The deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that even the most mundane administrative task is threaded into something infinite and enduring. The life you document with signs becomes part of the unchanging history written in starlight. You turn your steps away from the harbor wall, leaving the silent brilliance of the fixed stars behind. The air, which moments ago felt vast and open under the deep indigo sky, now feels contained by the close walls of the city. A shift occurs in the quality of the quiet. It is no longer the expansive hush of night meeting ocean, but a denser, more human silence, woven from distant sleeping breaths, and the occasional soft clatter of something dropped inside a curtained doorway. You walk slowly across the packed earth passage that serves as your path home. Each footfall makes barely a sound, absorbed quickly by the dust mixed with fine grit. The sounds are whispers, a low murmur of voices drifting from one dwelling, punctuated by the distant, gentle lapping rhythm of waves against moored hulls, a constant reminder of the Mediterranean's patient breath. You continue this unhurried movement through the winding paths that climb gently away from the port docks and into the cluster of homes situated on higher ground. Overhead, the sky is still immense, but it seems to curve down low over the rooftops, making the darkness feel enveloping rather than empty. The scent changes again, too. Gone is the cool mineral dampness of wet salt and cedar. Now, mingled with the cooler night air, you catch faint wafts of cooking smoke, a soft, sweet haze carrying the promise of simple sustenance. You navigate around corner after corner, passing doorways that are either darkened secrets or softly illuminated squares offering fleeting glimpses into domestic life. The walls surrounding you are built from sun-baked mud brick and carefully set stones, absorbing the residual heat of the day while radiating a cool darkness in the night. You find yourself observing small details. The manner in which woven matting hangs over a doorway, the slight tilt of a terracotta water pot near a low wall, the patch of rough-hewn stone that has clearly been smoothed by centuries of passing feet. These objects, simple and worn, speak volumes about the steady continuity of life here, an ongoing cycle measured not by grand events, but by the necessities of daily living. Sleeping, eating, waiting for the next tide. As you draw closer to your own dwelling, the sounds become more intimate. You hear the muffled sound of a door latch clicking shut across the way, perhaps a family retiring early from their evening tasks. The murmurs of voices grow softer, becoming indistinguishable hums that provide an acoustic blanket over the town's slumbering life. Your purpose now is solely internal, to shed the accumulated mental effort of the day and prepare your mind for stillness. You slow your pace again, allowing your body to settle into a rhythmic calm that mirrors the tide you have been following all day. The passage leading directly to your home is narrow, forcing you to turn sideways in spots, an almost intimate passing through neighbors' invisible boundaries. You note the cooling air settling over your shoulders, a comforting weightlessness replacing the faint warmth absorbed from the midday sun hours earlier. Everything feels saturated with humidity and quiet purpose. You approach the simple wooden door of your home. It is sturdy, marked by time, and seems to exhale its own coolness onto you as you reach out a hand to steady yourself against it. Stepping inside is an act that feels like crossing a threshold into memory. The cool earth floor instantly changes beneath your sandals, grounding you with a familiar, reassuring coolness. The smell of the inner house is distinct, a mixture of stale smoke from the hearth, accumulated dust, and the dry scent of packed reeds used for sleeping mats. This internal atmosphere is protective, sealed off from the greater clamor of the port outside, yet still humming with the residue of community life. You shed your outer garments slowly, letting them drop to the ground in a heap near the entryway. The gesture itself feels ritualistic, a separation from the public, bustling self you inhabited throughout the long hours of commerce and accounting. You move into the central space, where the evening light does not penetrate, leaving everything in a soft, deep twilight glow. You walk past the low storage shelf built into the wall that holds spare pots and simple oils. Your gaze falls upon your riding satchel, still heavy with finished tablets, the ledger of cedar measurements, the list of offerings for the temple, the star paths recorded by starlight. They represent the measurable complexity of a full day's existence. You do not open them immediately. Instead, you simply set the weighty bundle down in a corner that will keep it dry from any damp air rising from the ground. The physical weight reminds you of the abstract mental effort required to balance accounts and track knowledge, the transfer of value, whether it was silver or starlight. You allow yourself a moment of stillness, standing right where you entered. You close your eyes for just a breath, letting the silence wash over the slight ringing in your ears that has been caused by hours of concentrated scratching against wet clay. This quiet is profoundly different from the sounds of rest. It is the deep, satisfying calm that comes after having structured chaos into order. The day's tasks, the weighing of bales, the calculation of angles, the transcription of sacred gifts, were intellectual acts of control. You were the keeper of structure in a world defined by movement. The incoming ships, the unpredictable market whims, the restless tide. Now, you must simply exist within that created order and let it recede. You begin the quiet habit of tidying your own space. You pick up a discarded reed stylus from a low stool near the wall. The wood is smooth and warm under your fingertips. You might check the basin where you rinse excess clay, noting how the residue has settled at the bottom, a muddy mosaic reflecting all the transactions of the day. The slight dampness on your fingers feels cool and final, like the closing chapter mark in an old book. You move toward your simple sleeping mat, which lies rolled neatly near the corner. Before lying down, you draw one last deep breath, taking in the scent of your own dwelling. The earthy clay, the faint ghost of wood smoke, the comforting blend of human habit. You consciously let go of the ledger numbers, the precise weight difference between a shipment from Byblos and one from Kyrenia. You release the names of foreign kings who commissioned temple works, or the specific degrees separation between stars that guide faraway ships. These things are fixed by your stylus on wet clay, but they do not define you when you sleep. They are merely patterns recorded for others to find later. Lying down, you feel the scratchy texture of the woven mat against your skin, a gentle resistance that signals the end of movement and effort. The last remnants of awareness remain tethered to the profound calm achieved by completing countless necessary acts, measuring, counting, remembering. You reflect on the sheer volume of things that must be recorded just for one day's life. The cedar needed for construction, the grain required for the temple altars, the silver to pay for the laborers' rations, and the positions of celestial bodies merely so others can find their way back home. It is a monumental weight of knowledge, all contained within these small tablets that will be stacked and forgotten until the next need arises. As your eyelids grow heavy, you picture those tablets again, the meticulous columns of numbers, the repeating signs, the elegant angular strokes flowing across the soft surface of the wet clay. They represent not just goods or stars, but trust itself. Trust in arithmetic, trust in foreign partnership, trust in the heavens to keep their reliable march above the chaotic earth. This deep-seated need for order is what sustains your life and Ugarit's trade. The thought brings a profound sense of quiet satisfaction, settling over you like the cool weight of the rising tide under the darkest part of the night. Your body slows down, matching the unhurried rhythm of the water lapping softly outside your dwelling's walls. You breathe slowly, deliberately, allowing the mental calculations and the smells of wet earth to wash away with every exhale, sinking into a deep and necessary rest, ready for the slow cycle